Ben Healy consumed 140 grams of carbohydrates per hour en route to his stage 6 Tour de France win. 140 grams of carbs every single hour. That number sounds insane, but that's exactly what Ben Healy did. Healy rode away from world-class riders for over an hour solo while still absorbing nearly 140 grams of carbohydrates every single hour. Now, that level of fueling, it sounds crazy to me and you, but it isn't rare anymore in the World Tour. It's the new standard. Most cyclists, myself included, used to think that this was madness, insane, a one-way ticket to gut stress. But I chatted with Dr. Sam Impey on the podcast recently. Sam's the co-founder of Hexus, and he's the performance nutritionist who works with a large chunk of the World Tour, including EF Education. And what he told me completely flipped how I think about fueling. Today I'm going to break down exactly how Ben Healy used this strategy to win one of the hardest stages in this year's Tour de France, and how it's forced me to rethink everything I thought I knew about what it means to fuel as a cyclist. Stage 6 of the 2025 Tour de France, 101 kilometers of absolutely brutal terrain, over 3,500 meters of climbing. Healy got himself into the main breakaway of the day. And it wasn't just any breakaway. This was a who's who of specialists, some of the best riders in the world. Mathieu van der Poel, two-time Vuelta stage winner Eddie Dunbar, Quinn Simmons, Yates. If you're in that group, you're expecting fireworks. You're expecting coming into the finale, you're expecting attacks, counter-attacks, and maybe even a late battle up that final climb. But that's not what happened at all. Healy launched his move with 42 kilometers still to race. 42 kilometers is a long way out for a solo move. Now, Healy is known for catching breakaway companions by surprise, but the timing of this attack, it surprised people who were even expecting that surprise. It caught absolutely everyone flat-footed. Now, if you've had a chance to check the stats from his ride, they're wild. He normalized 329 watts for the entire stage and hit a max of 969 watts as he was forcing that separation from his breakaway companions. He was averaging over 50 kilometers an hour for large chunks of his solo escape. It was one of those days where everything just clicked. But what stood out the most? It wasn't the numbers. It wasn't even the win. That was the first Irish win since Sam Bennett on the Champs-Élysées in the green jersey of Quickstep a few years back. It was what happened inside his body, the fuel strategy. Because Healy consumed 535 grams of carbohydrates during that stage. That's just shy of 140 grams of carbohydrates per hour. He had 2 meals before the race even started. I'm going to break these down in a minute because this is actually very interesting. When he got onto the bike, it was a drip feed of gels, drinks, and 0 missed feeds throughout the entire ride. That kind of fueling, that's performance nutrition dialed to the watt, optimized to the minute. And while the media have been focused, and some would say rightly so, on his unique aero position, that aero puck helmet he wore, or that massive normalized power, the real story might be the science behind what's happening under the skin. The fact that his gut, his muscles, his liver, his brain were all perfectly fueled for 5 hours of full gas work. Okay, let's take a breath here for a second. Because for years, and I know I'm not alone here, I thought that 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour was high. If I was getting really adventurous, maybe I would verge up to 80 grams of carbohydrates per hour. But the idea of 140 grams of carbohydrates per hour, that was laughable. When I was full-time, I'd often train with friends who were World Tour over in Girona. And my fueling strategy looking back was laughable. It was based on their fueling strategy, so cutting edge at the time, and it normally was a cafe stop halfway through a ride. I kid you not on this one. So a 6-hour ride meant that 3 hours into the ride, we'd stop for a scone, a flat white, and we'd roll home. So if it was a 4-hour ride, 2 hours in, it'd be that stop. Maybe I'd have a banana bread and a cappuccino, mix it up that day. I wasn't fueling because fueling wasn't a consideration at the time. If you'd taken a gel out of your pocket on a training ride, you'd be absolutely laughed at. The following day, people would literally come up to you and say, "Hey, I heard you brought a gel on a training ride yesterday. You must have been really suffering with the guys." I used to finish these rides totally empty, hardly able to carry my bike up the stairs, head spinning, dizzy. And I then moved into a period, like most of us did, where I began to cherry pick the science to support my shocking nutritional habits and strategy. I'd rationalize it with nonsense about fat adaptation, convincing myself that feeling shattered was somehow a sign that I was adapting, that the ride was working. But in reality, I was underfueled every single time, never getting the adaptation I could have from that training session. The truth is, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand the demands. I wasn't thinking in terms of energy systems or glycogen rates. I was eating like a human being, not like an athlete. And feeling like this was such a total waste of time, especially as the years went on and I wasn't a full-time athlete anymore. When I became time crunched, I really should have been looking to maximize the return on my training investment. Like if you peel away 4 hours to go and do a ride, you want to make sure you get 4 hours of adaptation from that ride. But fueling correctly, it takes time. And this is one of the key messages I want to get into you today. You can't just jump from how I was fueling to how Ben Healy is fueling. It doesn't work like that. What I didn't understand, and what Dr. Impey finally made clear, is that 140 grams of carbohydrates per hour, it's earned. And it's earned through gut training, graded adaptation, where you get more used to processing that volume of sugar. But the highest carb intake possible, it isn't the goal for every single rider. There's a difference between absolute and relative intake. Let me explain. Riding at 300 plus watts for 4 to 5 hours, that's likely a zone 3 effort for Ben Healy. That burns through an absurd amount of glycogen. You have to replenish that at that rate to avoid decline. But your zone 3 ride is unlikely the same power output as Ben Healy in absolute terms. So unless you're matching that output, copying that intake is a recipe for disaster. And I learned that the hard way. A couple of months ago, when the high carb train was in full steam, I wanted to go out and I wanted to try this. And I jumped straight into a 140 gram per hour strategy. I thought, let's see what all the hype is about. I was using beta fuel, bottles, gels, the whole setup. I felt great for 2 hours. Then at about 2.5 hour mark, it all came crashing down. Stomach twisted, nausea hit me like a train. I actually ended up pulling over to the side of the road and I ended up puking. It was disgusting. That was it. Game over. Now, just to clarify, this isn't a bunk. This isn't fatigue. This was my gut saying, what are you doing to me? I didn't train for that load. I didn't build a tolerance. I didn't earn that strategy. And that's when it finally clicked. This isn't about copying numbers. It's about understanding why these numbers work and when they don't work. Here's where it gets really, really interesting. The gut is just like your legs, your lungs, your heart. It's trainable. That was one of the biggest things I took away from sitting down with Sam Impey. Most of us go out the door and we have an objective for that training session. We go and we train our VO2 max, our threshold, our sprint, but never our gut. We just expect it to keep up. And when it doesn't, we assume we're not good at digesting carbohydrates. But the World Tour guys, they're training their gut all year round. 120 grams, 130 grams, 140 grams, or even higher. Not just in races, in training, on 5-hour base rides, on long climbs, on hot days, on cold days. Because the gut, just like your functional threshold power, it doesn't magically adapt. You've got to nudge it there slowly. They log the symptoms, they track glucose responses, and they work with nutritionists like Sam who treat the gut as seriously as coaches treat power data. That's why when the decisive move comes, that solo attack or the final climb, they're not hoping to have fuel left in the tank. They're focused on executing because they've rehearsed this exact situation.